So tuning into media reports yesterday, it seemed to me that all of a sudden, all kinds of things were going wrong for co-president Elon Musk. And the biggest issue that was being mentioned was some meeting that was held in which Trump seemed to change what he had done in a prior meeting in which Musk seemed to be in charge of everything and he was ignoring or diminishing his own cabinet secretaries. In other words, Musk is taking a hatchet to everything or issuing orders for people to do replies to emails quickly or else, and then the secretaries would tell the same people not to do that. There was this back and forth going on, but it appeared that Trump was definitely all in on Musk. And now all of a sudden he's saying, no, no, we're bringing the secretaries in. And instead of taking an axe to everything, we'll be using a scalpel, a more careful approach so that in fact the secretaries will make the decisions, which effectively amounts to a bit of a demotion. And that's one level. But then at the same time, it was published that some of his rockets are exploding. You remember a while back, this guy could do no wrong. Rockets were coming back to Earth and landing precisely on the spot. He was looking like some kind of magician. All of a sudden, the opposite is happening. Then on top of that, the news that his Tesla stock has now returned all the way back in value to where it was when Biden took office, which is really remarkable. And of course, you can expect that the shareholders are going to be quite upset because he's running around trying to change the government quickly. And in the meantime, his car company isn't doing well. And you would presume he would have to pay more attention or things there could get even worse. Other news featured women he's had children with pleading for help because one of the, I think, sons is sick, and of course he's ignoring that. And you know that he's not doing well when he's not tweeting. And in the midst of yesterday's debacle, he apparently didn't tweet for 3 whole hours, which tells you that he's probably scrambling. Now, the thing is, how does this connect to the astrology? It's actually quite fascinating because in my recent videos on Musk, I did say that February was the month when there was greatest pressure in his chart due to the Saturn going through Pisces square his Venus, which, by the way, describes what he's doing because Venus in his own chart is in the 12th house, which among many, many meanings, one of them is institutions and the idea of cutting back, reducing institutions fits perfectly going over that planet. That's what can happen when a person has some type of job. I mean, any job would count for this, but especially a big job. Cycles in the chart get expressed through there. Like a great example of this is Barack Obama during the early part of his administration in 08, 09, 2010, had very strong health aspects, the kind of thing that could have made him sick, but it was because he was implementing the Affordable Care Act. So that's how it was channeling through the chart. But in any case, Saturn was actually strongest for Elon Musk by exact degree earlier in February, though it's still there and it's a question of orb. And I usually try to stick to orbs that are as tight as possible, looking for the greatest intensity. But it is also a fact that planets, a couple of degrees before they reach the degrees of the planet they're aspecting, and then 2 to 3 degrees later, they continue to have an effect. And this was the key yesterday, you see, because what I noticed is all of this negativity came into the foreground, and I thought, well, what's going on in the chart? And I realized the moon was going through there by way of the fact that yesterday it was in Gemini in the same degrees that are going to trigger where that Venus is. It's how astrology works. There will be a big planet creating the angle, and then a faster moving planet, the moon being the fastest, but this can also happen through Mercury, Venus, even the solar movement can act as a trigger, Mars as well. The moon is the fastest, but seeing it go through there as all of this negativity came into the foreground tells me that that Saturn pressure is still there, even though now it's already close to a couple of degrees beyond the degrees of the Venus. But I'll tell you what is really encouraging about this. The fact that he is having this much of an issue with something that, to be honest, the Saturn is going to pull further away. And although in the case of Trump, it increases the pressure, it's true that in the case of Musk, the pressure does go down. He does have a whole lot of midpoints in Gemini and Virgo that can still keep some pressure there from the Saturn cycle, but I would guess less so than Trump, particularly as we go into the summer, because then Jupiter moves into Cancer, which is Musk's sign, and so on. However, the encouraging part of this is that as we move toward later in the year, and especially into 2026, the cycles then of Saturn are much more complicated for Musk, because where this is to the Venus, all of this action, that'll be to his ascendant and sun, and Mercury too, but especially the ascendant and the sun. And so this is where the real accountability is going to come into the foreground, which, given the fact that that is when you start to become more and more accountable to voters, is probably an advantage. And essentially, it's a waiting game in terms of how this is likely to turn out. And just want to say that, pointing to the title of the video, say he's in trouble now, that's exactly what I mean, meaning likely less so as we move forward. However, I would say that on the plus side, the fact that more people are being brought into the picture by Trump himself. I mean, the man is incredibly heedless, but he seems sensible enough to know that things are not working very well with Musk, so he's limiting his power. But you also have to realize this whole crew, the one thing about them is they're not the sharpest pencils in the drawer. So in a sense, it's good to cut back on Musk's power, but it's also good to involve more of them, because that's not going to help. All you'll have is probably more problems on account of the fact that they're not a very sharp group. So I would say overall, this is great news in the sense that Musk is likely to do less damage, even though for some time his chart is definitely strengthening as Jupiter goes into his sun degrees later in the spring and into the summer. But you just have to be patient and wait it out until we get later in the year, and especially next year, which, remember, is an election year. And so it becomes very, very important that all of this malfeasance is brought into the light and that it plays to their disadvantage.